Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics who write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family business and entrepreneurs, and currently I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today's guest is David Aaker, author of the book Aaker on Branding, the Playbook to Building Strong Brands. David, welcome.
Glad to have me. I'm glad to be here, I should say.
So David, you've had a very long career, but why don't you just give us the Cliff Notes version of how you got to where you're at now, where you're an internationally known expert in marketing?
Well, I came out of the graduate school at Stanford as a quantitative sort of statistician, and I did a lot of multivariate statistics and um, and wrote a book on market research. And then I drifted in a business strategy and wrote a book on that. And in the late 80s. A couple of things happened. One was that the strategy sort of theory of the day had failed, and that was the BCG growth share matrix, and the idea that if you grow market share, no matter how you did it, you would have a successful strategy. And of course, that wasn't true. And the other sort of paradigm of the 80s was scientific marketing, which was engendered by the fact that you now had scanner data and you could do experiments and show results immediate. And that drove people to short-term programs which destroyed brands. And anyway, in the 80s, people were observing that they weren't achieving growth. They were losing profits. They were destroying brands. Their strategy wasn't working, and they were ready for something new. And there then came brand equity. And so in the early 90s, brand equity found a home because the executives of the day were ready for anything new. And so the idea that brand is an asset, that brand would support a strategy going forward, that would brand would generate long-term results, would enhance brand loyalty, which is an asset everybody understood, um, just struck home. And I was kind of at the right place at the right time. And nobody knew what brand equity was. And I wrote my first book, which defined brand equity, and my second that told how to brand it. Um, so I've been into brands and brand equity ever since.
It's amazing to me about how some brands disappear, like Kodak and Blockbuster, where they had a lot of brand equity and somehow managed to lose all its value. Same with some of the biggest retail stores like Kmart and so forth. Huge brands, right? How do these guys end up like Sears? I couldn't get a bigger brand than Sears and all the different businesses that they could have been leaders, like they could have been the Amazon of their time and all the other great businesses that they started. How do these guys lose that?
Well, one of the things I've done recently is to develop what I call the five Bs, which reminds people that brands are more than just awareness and image. And and one of the things I focused on in these five Bs is something I've been dealing with for a long time. In fact, I wrote a book called um, uh, it should have been called Branding and Disruptive Innovation because it's about the role of branding in this disruptive innovation and the value of disruptive innovation these days. But um, the idea is that, or basic driving idea is that it's not about brand awareness. I mean, all the brands you mentioned, Blockbuster and so on, were never lost their awareness. Everybody knew about them, but they lost their relevance. So now what we have to worry about is not awareness, it's relevance. And relevance is awareness or visibility or energy plus credibility. So you have to, if Pepsi-Cola should make automobiles, everybody knows the name Pepsi-Cola, but they would never buy an automobile from them because they have no
Hmm.
credibility in automobiles. So so the key is brand relevance. And so if you look at a brand that's declining, there's usually a couple of reasons, but one of them, the main one, may be they're not relevant anymore. People aren't buying compact cars; they're buying electric cars, or they're buying four-wheel drive cars. But you may making a great car, but you're not making what they're buying anymore. You're losing relevance. And that's what happened to Blockbuster and these others. They just lost relevance. So they maintain a strong brand for what they were selling. The problem is people weren't buying what they were selling anymore. And so they weren't relevant to what they were buying. And so the strategic challenge you have is twofold. One is you would like to be the disruptor. You would like to be the one that's making others not relevant anymore. And in doing so, branding is really crucial. And you can read all these books on disruptive innovation, starting with the Blue Ocean, which is the foremost book. They don't mention branding. Blue Ocean has a half a page on branding, talking about the first mover advantage, which incidentally doesn't even exist. But the reality is, if you are going to go into disruptive innovation, you are going to make others irrelevant. You need a brand. You need a brand to position the new disruption to help it win. You need a brand to help you scale it. You need a brand to build barriers so that others don't come in and enjoy the fruits of your innovation. And so anyway, branding is really important in that. And then the other side of the coin is if you're a blockbuster and somebody's in encroaching on your field, then you need to become relevant. You need to match what the must have that they've put on the table, or you might raise this ante, you raise the stakes and actually leapfrog them and do something. You look at what Netflix did. I mean, Netflix could have been Blockbuster easily, but they they went the other way. They became a disruptor instead of irrelevant. And Blockbuster could have done that. And the irony, of course, that is well known is that if you are successful in making money, as Blockbuster was, you have no incentive to to walk away from all those assets and start something new. Um, and anyway, yeah, that's my take on Blockbuster.
One of the things before we get into your book, you just commented about first mover advantage really doesn't exist. I think that's what you were saying.
Yes.
Tell me more about that because so many college professors talk about first mover advantage, and I find that most of the great companies weren't first.
Uh, yeah, I don't know what the percentage is. There's a wonderful book, and I can't think of the name of it now, but it did some research on something like 45 or 50 brands, and they looked at their market share today, who are the leaders, and how long have they been leaders, and they went back to who were the founders. And the founding brand was almost never the early market leader, almost never. I mean, Diet Coke was not even close to being the first low calorie cola, and you can look at virtually any category, and you'll see that the early pioneer is not the one. And, I mean, Apple was never. It wasn't the first iPod. It wasn't the first iPad. It wasn't the first computer. It wasn't the first anything. But they're the first ones to get it right. And they came when the technology was right. And that's just true across the board. Almost always, the first mover was somebody that was a little early in terms of technology. The first mover maybe had an inadequate marketing clout behind them or skill. It was missing something, and then somebody came in and uh, and they became the early market leader. They became the exemplar of the category. They're the ones that built it.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting comment that you made about that. So your five B's, brand vision, brand position, brand personality, brand assets, and brand portfolio and architecture. You start off your book on the five B's. Let's start with the foundation. You introduce the five B's as the core of modern branding. If I'm a founder building a company today, what should I care about this framework? Why should I care
Well,
about this framework?
I think that the reason I developed the framework was to realize that branding is a rich um, and it has more breadth than you probably think it does. And most people think of branding in terms of just gaining visibility or maybe learning something about the brand, but it's much more than that. An important element of branding and why it has a role in these five B's is the brand portfolio. And the argument is that you almost never build a brand. It's too hard to communicate a brand because there's so much going on. So what you need is a team of brands. You need what I call silver bullet brands, for example. You need branded energizers. You needed branded differentiators. You needed branded source of credibility. And you look like Uniqlo, for example, the Japanese clothing retailer, and they have Airism fabrics for the summer. They have Heat Tech fabrics for the winter. They have uh, a host of like a dozen brands that help them tell a story, both internally and externally, I should add. And that's sort of example of the richness of branding that most people miss. And in fact, if there's one thing that could help most organizations, I can almost guarantee it. If I walked into an organization, a nonprofit or service or a durable or a B2B, I can almost guarantee that that they are under-branded. I could go in and ask them, what's special about your brand or your company? What do you do different? Why do people really love you? What are your employees proud of? And they can give a 3 or 4 minute spiel and with a lot of energy and articulation. And then at the end of which I asked, why don't you brand that? And
Mhm.
because it's almost impossible to communicate something that's not branded. Because a branded is it represents a whole bunch of associations that's in its image and connected to its loyalty. And and if you don't have a brand, it's really impossible to communicate, which is usually a pretty complex and involved um, entity.
So, in your experience, where do most companies go wrong when they treat branding as marketing instead of strategy?
Well, there's a couple of dangers. One is what I just alluded to, that they're too narrow in their focus on building their brand, and they neglect uh, complementary brands and supporting brands for one thing. Another is that I've been thinking about is uh, what I call short-termism. There's too much of a focus on, getting sales, next week. And of course, that's certainly important. But for a long time, getting sales next week has been a pitfall for branding. It was certainly in the 80s when you had the scientific branding that gave you access to short-term sales data and led to destructive brand damaging programs that generate sales all right, but they were off brand. And so I worry that that's sort of coming back a little bit. it has actually been given a name, a very respectable name. It's called demand marketing, or sometimes called performance marketing, or sometimes called evidence-based marketing. But it's given a very uh, a very satisfying brand name. And and if you go too far in that direction, if you elevate short-termism, then you are in danger of not building the brand. And so one of the things you want to do is to make sure you know what your brand stands for. It should have 3 to 5 pillars that when your brand gets mentioned by a customer or an employee, you want them to think of those pillars. If your employee is describing or your marketing group is describing what you're offering to people, they have these pillars to base them on. These pillars should have labels, and the labels should really be something that is motivating and exciting. Like the Haas School of Business has 4 pillars, and one of them was confidence without attitude. And that turned out to be extremely differentiating, extremely energizing. And most other business schools in the world were envious of Haas that um, had that as a pillar because it really attracted a different kind of students, it attracted a different kind of faculty, it created a different kind of curriculum, and and uh, and it was very appealing. Students wanted to come there because they didn't want to be in a place where everybody else had an attitude and they had a sense of entitlement and so on. And so the idea is that you want these pillars to have a label that act as a brand almost because it represents that side of the brand and the organization.
Who does it wrong? Like when you were talking about companies that don't do it right, what are the mistakes that they're making?
Well, I think that the I just sort of alluded to 2 of them. One is to be too focused on the short term and not look at the kind of
I
brand
did.
you need to support the strategy, and the second is to be too narrow in your view.
I mean, can you give us in history who some brands that we might remember that really don't exist anymore, but they were hot for a while?
Oh, well, one comes to mind is Segway. I don't know if how many are old enough to remember Segway, but
We all remember Segway.
it was this it still exists in some form, but it's a platform you could get on, and it would it just you stand on this platform and it would take you anywhere, and it was the I think it was Bill Gates that said, "This is the next automobile. This is going to take over." It had it had picture on Time magazine. The Segway had a cover story on Time magazine. I mean, it had more promotion than any other new product probably ever. And and people were predicting that it was going to be it was going to see exceed General Motors as a company because this thing was going to take over, and 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 it it fizzled. I mean, it just didn't go anywhere. It turned out that their prime market was mailmen and policemen, that this was going to really change the life of mailmen and policemen. Well, the 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 mailman, first of all, a lot of them couldn't existed in training. You couldn't use it, but a lot of them they needed to carry something in their shoulder, and this device didn't allow them to do that very easily. And uh, and anyway, and the policemen they were just fine with bicycles if they needed to get around. Anyway, the prime market didn't fizzle, and it turned out there was no other market. It turned out they made this wonderful machine, and it was wonderful. Um, it was just exactly what it said. It was a marvelous, marvelous invention from a technical point of view, but the people didn't want it. I mean, they didn't need it. They didn't. No, nobody they didn't have a market for it. And another thing, they didn't have dealers. So they were selling it through, I don't know, hardware stores or discount or Targets or something in the world, but there was nobody to show somebody how to use it. And there was nobody to repair it. So they didn't really have the infrastructure that they needed. And because it was didn't seem like it was that hard to run and didn't need repair very much. So that was a one of their downfalls too. But it was terrible. And then yeah, and anyway, that's one.
In chapter two, brand assets have real value. You make the case that brands are real assets. If I'm talking to investors, how should I explain the value of my brand in a way they take seriously?
Well, I think more generally, um, how do you how does a marketing manager, CMO, sort of communicate to the rest of the C-suite that the brand is an asset and needs to be treated as such and resourced as such. And so it's sort of an abstract thing. So how do you make it come to life? Well, there's a couple of ways. One is you can engage in case studies. And you can show examples, and there's plenty of case studies of brands that have built their brand and exploded sales. Like I talk about Dove Real Beauty program, how when that started, this is bar soap. That's when it started 20 years ago with Real Beauty program, this social program to help women have more self-confidence and self-esteem by changing their definition of beauty. Um, that program has created the energy and the likability and more to change a $2.6 billion business into a $6.5 billion business. And that was all brand. There's no product innovation that did it. Well, they did go into different product categories, but it was mostly that program that allowed them to do that. So that's one thing. Find some case studies of people that have done it and use that. I mean, I wrote a book on stories, signature stories, and how powerful they are. And if you tell a story of Dove, and it can relate to your business. That's one way. Another way is statistical analysis. I've worked with Bob Jacobson, another statistician, to show that on the average, if you increase brand equity, you will increase stock return. And we know that because we've done several studies and several databases, and the impact is almost as great as an earnings change. And then you can look at I talk about 15 ways brand equity helps a business. And if you look at it at that granular level, it becomes easier to understand. If you look at, say, brand visibility, for example, if a brand is visible, it's familiar, and people just like the familiar, whether it's music or baseball teams or whatever, they like the familiar. So just to know that it's familiar is helpful in keeping customers, and it signals something. If you know the name, you think in your head, well, it must be pretty good. There must be some market success. Otherwise, why would I know? I've heard about it. There's got to be a reason I've heard about it. So just the visibility, just the fact that you've heard the name before signals that it's probably pretty good. And and so that's just visibility. And if you look at brand loyalty, I mean, my goodness, if you have a loyal customer base, the marketing costs go way down. It turns out it's much cheaper to keep a customer. It's much cheaper to increase the usage of a loyal customer than it is to get a new one. Very expensive to get a new one. So you can directly relate the loyalty, which is part of brand equity, to the cost of marketing. So those are some of the ways that you can uh, communicate that the brand has value. And um, the communicating to stockholders is a tough chore, but communicating to the rest of the C-suite is more feasible and more necessary.
Of all the ways a brand creates value, which one do you think leaders consistently underestimate?
Well, that's a good question. I think that it's really um, hmm, that's a good question. I think that maybe there's an opportunity for people to create brand communities. And that might be underestimated because the value of a brand community, if you can actually create a community around your brand, like Esty did, the craft company, and like um, Salesforce has done with a community of users, it's sort of the ultimate level of brand loyalty. And and that is just so powerful. It used to be very rare to see brand communities emerge. The Harley Davidsons of the world were very rare, but now it's more common, it's more feasible because of the internet. You can have websites that can do a lot of the communication and coordination for you. And so I think that the dream of having a brand community is is more feasible than before. And plus, some people have developed brand communities around social programs. Like Thrivent has a brand community around Home for Humanity and some local social programs that have they bring customers together, organized by zip code, and they have hundreds of brand communities that do social good and have little to do with their basic business, which is managing portfolios. And so that might be one.
In chapter three, create a brand vision. A lot of founders have a vision, but often's product focused. What does a true brand vision look like?
Well, a product is an important part of it. You want to know what are your must-haves, what are your differentiating attributes. But there's people connect with brands in ways that have nothing to do with the attributes and benefits of the brand. A brand can have a personality. A brand can have a relationship with a customer. Um, you can admire a brand. You can respect a brand for things they do beyond the products that they make, and so forth. So you want to think in terms of is it do you want to have well, I think the most common dimensions that you should everybody should consider are probably brand personality. And this is certainly true for B2C brands. And because you create a personality like Aflac's insurance company has the Aflac duck, this marvelous symbol that communicates this really deathly boring uh, information in a light humorous way, and it strangely enough creates sort of credibility in addition to that. And then in a B2B company and in a service company, it's almost always the case that organizational characteristics are an important part of the brand. Because if you're a customer or an employee, you're having a relationship with an organization. So the organizational characteristics, which may have nothing to do with their products, at least directly, is are they honest? Are they trustworthy? Trustworthy is really really important in that sector. Is it will they do what they say? Uh, will they are they reliable? Will they stand behind their service? Will they uh, be there, next year, next decade, and so forth? So those are two.
As companies grow and enter new markets, how do they evolve that vision without losing what made them special?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think that it is the case that you change and you can change your brand and you change your brand vision over time, and it there's a terrific value in keeping the same pillars active and so on. So because they build equity over time, and if you change them or if you add new ones, then you're you have a communication task in front of you. But at the same token, the bigger opportunity usually is asking yourself not why do I need to change my brand, but uh, how can I energize it? How can I make uh, the brand have more energy and visibility with the existing pillars? And so you don't sort of throw them away, but you uh, you energize them.
In chapter 4, the organization as a differentiator, you talk about the company itself becoming part of the brand. What are some signals that an organization is actually doing this well?
Well, I think that brand companies that have strong brands often have a strong internal organizational culture. And I think the best way to determine that is to the extent that the first of all, the culture pillars or the brand pillars applying to culture are known to everybody. And they're not just something that somebody did once in an exercise and they're on the shelf and nobody mentions them and uses them. The other signal is whether everybody kind of knows what's off brand and on brand. And so if somebody makes a proposal, then it's off brand. Somebody will say that right away and or challenge them. Is that us? Is that on brand? Is that advance our brand? And in a strong culture, that's so evident that people can make decisions at the lowest level uh, in the organization and still be vindicated and supported because everybody says, yeah, he said it's off brand, and he has the knowledge and the instinct and the power to do that.
We have a couple questions from the audience. One question is a multi-tier marketing like Amway still a viable sales model?
That's a really good question. I have no idea. I don't know. I I don't know. I haven't followed Amway. I think they have other outlets now, but I'm not sure. I think that using social media and using websites to create communities uh, is probably allows them to retain some of the flavor of what they're doing in terms of having some sort of group uh, membership benefit um, that could maybe make their model adapt um, to the digital world. But I really don't know.
Another question from the audience. And thinking about the social media opportunity risk where others can ruin or positively project your brands at light speed. What are your thoughts about real ways to administer this and what to do? What do you force in the near future? What do you forecast in the near future for companies dealing with this?
Yeah, that's really a tough one. And um, I'd like to get the people in the group to give their opinion on it, but um, it's really scary. Uh, that's for sure. One of the things that I've been interested in the political space recently, and I talk about in that context. What do you do if if there's a disaster that happens to your brand? Like there's some you get blindsided by some sort of piece of publicity that's really bad. It may be true, or maybe partially true, it may be completely false. The sudden acceleration of Audi suffered through and so on. What do you do? And so what I tell them is that you have to, acknowledge the problem and you have to address it, but then you have to change the conversation or reframe the discussion. And I uh, talk about in the political space, for example, Kamala Harris got blindsided with this ad that had her um uh, explaining that prisoners got to have gender change operations in the prison, and that was the law. And so the opponents ran an ad implying that she favored that, and I don't know if she did or not, but that wasn't what she said. And so if she could have right at the minute reframed the conversation to say that the issue was, you know, is it good or bad that Camille Harris favors that program, and change the thing to say that's now the law and we need to change the law. I mean that issue would have completely gone away. It would turn out to be um, quite effective. And I just saw Pete Buttigieg lately talk about the same problem, and that is, the trans uh, issue and how much support should the trans community get. And in his response, he completely changed the reframed the discussion, and he said, "Well, it's complicated. There's chess people, there's basketball people, and so on. We should let the people in those spheres make the decision. So let the colleges, the high schools, the colleges, the pros that are dealing with basketball, let them decide." And so now that the discussion is completely framed around who decides. And so all the negative energy gets sort of sucked out of the room. And and so anyway, I think that you need to be poised when something really bad happens to to make sure that your position is visible so that if it gets picked up by the media, which is the worst case, the media will then have your side to present as well as the negative side, and then reframe the conversation, change the conversation, nature of the conversation is what have always advised.
Another question from the audience. Please comment on the viability of a razor blade sales strategy. Please, the razor and sell the disposable.
I don't know what that is. Do
Oh,
you?
it's you're giving away the razor essentially for free and making all your money off the razor blades.
Oh, I see. I see. Well, yeah. Um, the company I'm associated with, Profit, we are a consulting company, and we have therefore, we have really no reliable ongoing income flow. And boy, that's what you want. You want, and yeah, if you're an entrepreneur, I would really look for a business model that's going to result in an ongoing flow of income. You want to lease instead of buy. I mean, you want to rent instead of buy. Uh, you want an ongoing flow of thing because that's so valuable and in so many ways. So that's I think entrepreneurs should look in that direction. What do
And
you
that's
think,
what
Mark?
Microsoft has been living off of that its entire existence, right?
Exactly.
And that's why they're so phenomenally profitable and have so much cash, just like
That's
Apple
right.
does in the
That's right.
bank. In chapter four, the organization as a differentiator, you talk about a company itself being part of the brand. What are some signals that an organization is actually doing this well?
Well, I think that if they view themselves as just making, airplanes or just providing financial services, um, they're so they become sort of a transactional um, partnership. It's then that's are sort of pretty shaky ground if but instead they have a lot of things about them. It might be social programs that they're associated with. It might be customer programs that don't necessarily that sort of complement what they do, but they're not part of their offering. Um, that can represent a much stronger uh, level of brand loyalty and a much stronger affinity and so forth. So again, when you look at your company, if you're a B2B or service company especially, you want to look beyond the uh, the customer journey and the benefits you provide along the way. But you especially want to look at the concept of trustworthiness and of being appeared to be innovative and up to speed and state of the art and not just falling behind. And you want to have energy as an organization. And so a lot of things like events and social programs can create energy for you. And that's all things that just don't come from the services you're providing.
You know, what I find interesting is how influencers have exceeded the number of people that read the New York Times or the Washington Post, or how major papers like the Philadelphia Inquirer, which 20 years ago held a value of almost 600 million, and now almost hold zero value, and they're in a nonprofit foundation to do it. And yet there are people who are 18 years old or between 18 and 30, and they build brands that become global almost overnight. How's that possible?
I don't know. Do you have an example?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have, well, I mean, I guess the Kardashians, because they have 170 million followers, and and singers like Taylor Swift have 100 million followers. But there are also people who talk about all kinds of things. Joe Rogan and his podcast has, I think, 30 million followers that listen to him, and he's already blown past, established names. So how do they build these kinds of brands, but they are built almost overnight and with no TV or radio advertising? I mean, many of the and most products, especially restaurants, the best restaurants never advertise.
Yeah, it's always puzzled me how some really good restaurants with great food and ambience have no customers, and others that are mediocre have waiting lists to get in. Um, there's it's sort of back in 1950 or something like that, or that's three-quarters of a century ago, there was some social um, s- scientists of the day that discovered word of mouth, and they discovered the power of word of mouth. And they in their research they would talk to people and they draw arrows from one person or another, and and the world discovered then that word of mouth was really important, and the network of friends you have was really important. And the people even back then when uh, it was back in they barely had telephones that everybody I don't even know if telephone is 100%. But anyway, back then they learned that word of mouth was really important and the networks somebody had was really important. And the network effect would determine how things spread and the value of that information. And they did research way back then to determine what makes an idea spread. And they found it was four things, I think. One was how informative it was, and another was how entertaining it was, and third was, um, how controversial or interesting or unique it was. And so all those ideas that they developed, these social scientists developed back in the 1950s or 60s, they apply today. Um, and uh, anyway, I think the same thing is true today. So you have the fact that word of mouth is so important that today I have a whole article about communicating in today's world. It's so hard because uh, people are skeptical. They don't have trust in institutions or speak people. It's very polarized. People have information overload. There's so much media clutter, and and uh, and there's so much information out there that people uh, can't cope with. So it's really hard. And so, how do you do that? Well, it comes back to some of these characteristics. Anyway, you have to deliver information, entertainment, or controversy or something. So, anyway, that if you apply that now to Joe Rogan and people like that, and my friend Scott Galloway has got the pivot thing that he's got a big following now with great demographics. But the principles, I think, is the same as it was back then. You ask
Well,
people who's got the biggest network, who's got the most compelling reason to share. It's not only its compelling reason that you are going to attend to it, it's so compelling that you'll share. You're going to tell somebody, you should look at this. You should look at this podcast. And and so I think that the explanation that was back in way deep history when people discovered word of mouth is still explains what's going on today.
I mean, you look at Facebook. When I was at Wharton, I was one of the first 100,000 users because they spread beyond Harvard, and it took off on its own. They have no, they weren't doing any TV, radio, or anything, any kind of brand building whatsoever. Same with Google. I can't think of any star, um, big brand that used those mediums to build a brand name that people just shared it because they enjoyed the experience. Look at chat that they acquired customers faster than any company in the history of the world. The number of customers with no marketing budget, right?
So when I tell people that about how do you communicate in this new environment, communication environment, I talk about that. Um, well, first of all, you need sort of breakout things that are so strong on information or entertainment or controversy that it'll be shareable. And and then you have to have what I call memory anchors. And these are things like taglines, visual symbols, branded programs, um, and uh, and so when you do get through that, it stays in memory. It just doesn't drift by. But what it does, I think, is to increase the importance of brand building devices that we've had before, which are things like events, things like sponsorships, things like name buildings or name parts of buildings, and and because all those things aren't really affected by the what I just talked about, the skepticism and so on. You're not skeptical about a sponsored event. Anyway, that's one kind of avenue.
There's a question from the audience. Can you briefly summarize the 5 B's of branding from your book?
Okay, the first one is brand equity, which just states that there's an overall purpose of branding, which is to be an asset that supports business strategies. And the second is brand relevance, which is visibility and credibility. That means that you will be considered. I mean, it doesn't mean that you're going to be preferred. It just means that you'll be eligible to be considered. And brand image is, as we've been talked about, not only functional benefits and attributes, but it's also other things that connect you to that brand that get you to like and use the brand. And so that involves things like brand personality and organizational characteristics. And the third one is brand loyalty, which is really the heart of branding. I mean, the value of a brand is all about the loyal customer base. And so you need to build that. You need to know how strong it is, how in size and intensity. And the fifth one is brand portfolio. And the idea there is that it's not a brand, it's a team of brands because you need these branded differentiators, branded energizers, branded source of credibility in order to tell your story.
In chapter 5, signature social programs, many companies try to connect with social causes. What makes the difference between something that resonates and something that feels like a PR move? And I feel today most of them are PR moves, especially when they attach themselves to Alex's lemonade stand or any of them. I don't know that they truly believe in these things, but feel that it's right for them.
Well, I think two things. First of all, most brands need energy. Most brands have no way to get it. And so social program provides a way to provide visibility, um, engagement, and affinity. And so it's really important for most brands to utilize social programs to gain those attributes. So, but having said that, then you have the problem. If your goal is to provide a brand lift, then isn't that going to be seen as the fact you're just cynical and you don't really care about the social program? And the answer is that there's a couple of things that signal that you are sincere. You do have, first of all, you have to exhibit a longevity. It's not an autumn promotion. It's a decade long or decades long commitment. And you show passion for it. You show a depth of understanding. You become a thought leader, or at least you're in the in conversation with thought leaders. You're just not you're giving more than money to it. You're really involved. You're engaged, and nobody says that about them because it's they just got too much passion, too much demonstrated knowledge and commitment.
We had lost you there for a minute, but we got you back, so I'm glad that you're back. How should a founder think about choosing a cause that actually fits their brand and makes them authentic?
That's a good question. I think it's I would worry less about fit and more about your ability to generate passion and involvement with it. I mean, Thrivent is doesn't have much fit with Homes for Humanity, Habitat for Humanity. I mean, it's a financial service company, and they're building homes for people in Africa. But they've had this connection now for 20 years, and it's part of their community. So all these local Thrivent communities our customer, their 2 million customers are engaged in helping the local community with about 50% of their effort, but 50% goes to Habitat for Humanity. And and so uh, that sort of somebody at Thrivent had passion for that, and over time the whole organization sort of generated that passion. So. Um, And of course, the other option, and so here you have two cases. One, Dove created the program Real Beauty. That's really hard. They created it, branded it, and managed it. Thrivent got an existing one, Habitat for Humanity, that already had a strong brand, had a lot of credibility, and they adopted it. And that's probably uh, the better way to go. But you really want to get in there where you can be engaged. It should not be a case where you just give them money. Now, sometimes uh, sort of having a big visible place in their fundraising events that can play an important role. But but yeah, it would be really nice if there was a close fit, and certainly you can look in that direction. Uh, if you make soda pop, then maybe delivering water to the people that don't have fresh water makes sense, um, because you're both using because water's important in your business. So it's certainly good to look in that direction because your ability to have passion and empathy will tend to be greater. But I wouldn't limit myself to that.
David, we probably have time for two more questions as we're almost through the hour. A question from the audience. The advice for small businesses usually to focus on their local community. However, if your brand is too tied to one location, expanding feels like starting over from zero. What's the best way to scale a local brand into a new area without doubling the marketing budget
Oh,
and effort?
that's a really good question. Um, and because the money you spend in the local area will only help you locally. And uh, so as a result of that, if you're a large national company and you want to have an affinity for the food bank, then you probably deal with Chicago and the National Food Bank thing and be involved in their national programs and national events. And and but there's uh, a lot of need and energy and opportunity locally too. So if you're a bank, it's it would be really nice to have a local presence, but then it'd be nice if you had a theme that sort of applied across your organization. So you could have local food bank themes, but you could have many of them, and so everybody would kind of be on the food bank train. So that would be sort of the ideal solution.
So here's my last question. Where what impact is AI going to have on marketing? I mean, especially like I have a lot of students wondering, even will they have a job in marketing, and what role AI is going to play in marketing, and how could they harness it? So, what's your whole take on AI when it comes to marketing?
Well, there's two things I would say. One is strategically, uh, you know, disruptive innovation is much more of a force than it used to be, and it's much more frequent. It has more impact, and it's just the it just goes faster, a lot faster than it used to. And uh, and AI is and more generally digital is part of that reason because a lot of these new disruptors have been driven by the uh, the ability to do things digitally we couldn't do before. And so AI is going to be a part of many of the disruptive innovations that we see in the future. And so, therefore, in that respect, it's a terrific opportunity. And then, of course, its impact in the number of disruptive innovations will be more in some sectors than others. With respect to marketing and branding, my firm Profit have really adopted AI extensively through everything we do. And one result is we can do things faster than we could before. Our research goes faster, our creative effort goes faster, and everything is speeded up, which means that companies, smaller companies, entrepreneurs that couldn't afford professional brand building strategy and execution can now do so. And it's just accessible to more businesses. And so I think that's a, a major impact of AI that small businesses now can access professional brand building by being by having engagements down in their price level for one thing, but also they can start doing some of the things themselves that otherwise they would have had to have find a company with staff to do so.
Yeah, I love AI because you can test out your theories, you can test out your plans, you can create personas of the people that you're marketing to and get feedback on that. So it's amazing. David, the hour went way too fast. And so I should probably read some of your other books and have you back again to talk about some of your things. And I know you have some papers coming out. What are the couple of papers that you have coming out that people might be able to read?
Well, let's see. One is this is the Sloan Management Review. There's three ways brands can combat information overload and skepticism, and we've talked about some of those today. That's one, and uh, I let's see. Anyway, as I said, that a lot of my work lately have been in the political sphere, so I've taken an interest in uh, helping people communicate better in the political space. And it has to do with this need to combat overload and skepticism in the marketplace and in the role of memory anchors to do that and to help you communicate.
David, thank you again so much for taking the time to talk about your book and about marketing and branding in general. We really appreciate it. And again, we look forward to hopefully having you back again in the future.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Everyone, have a wonderful weekend. Look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.